Good morning. My name is Federiga Bindi. I'm a senior fellow at the Institute for Women Policy Research in Washington, D.C. This presentation was presented for the NIC Conference on Gender and National Security in May 2023. The topic of the presentation is the importance of gender and education. The topic of my presentation is gender and education. There are four main variables we need to look at. Educational participation, that is to say, how far girls go within the educational system. Educational achievement, how well they perform. Field of study, which type of classes they're taking. And finally, the benefits of gender parity in education. We will begin with the educational participation. Historically, men tended to have higher educational attainment levels than women. In older age groups, men are definitely more likely to have performed through secondary education. But if you look at the youngest age group, that is to say younger than 35, then the historical pattern is reversed. Even a non-statistical analysis of my students show that at this point we have more girls in college than we do have men. However, this pattern is only for developed countries. More than 2/3 of the countries have reached gender parity in primary education. The problem is that the other third is all in less developed countries, including Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, where girls are more likely to be disadvantaged than boys. Girls' enrollment in primary school in low-income countries is 78%, as compared to the world average of 88%. In low-income countries, only 36% of girls complete lower secondary education, as compared to 44% of the boys. As you can see in this figure elaborated by the World Bank, the areas where education is lower is Central Africa and part of Asia. This data, also from the World Bank, shows that the highest number of girls out of school is in low-income countries from fragile conflict and violent countries in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, the gaps are starker in countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence. Girls are 2.5 times more likely to be out of school than boys in FCB. They are 90% more likely to be out of secondary school than in non-FCB context. 27 million children are out of school in conflict zone, and refugees are 5 times more likely to be out of school than the other children. What is actually very sad in all this is that refugees' kids suffer in terms of scolarization even when they arrive in a new host country, be it because of language, of lack of opportunities, or other things. So even when you are out of a camp and finally relocated, it's not said that your scolarization is going to benefit from it. In culture in which a higher value is placed on boys' education, girls risk being taken out of school and they're likely to enter the workforce at a very early age. Gender-based discrimination in education is both a cause and a consequence of deep-rooted differences in society. Disparities, whether in terms of poverty, ethnic background, disability, or traditional attitudes, undermine the ability of women and girls to exercise their rights. Harmful practices such as early marriage, gender violence, as well as discriminatory education laws and policies still prevent millions of girls from enrolling and completing their respective education. Women still account for nearly 2/3 of the over 700 million adults without basic literacy skills. The reasons are poverty, geographical isolation, minority status, disability, early marriage and pregnancy, gender-based violence, and traditional attitudes about the status and role of women and men. Let's go now to educational achievement. This is very interesting. Ability tests from 50 years ago showed significant gender differences. But if you look nearer in time, the nearer you get, the difference becomes so smaller that is actually non-existing anymore. Finally, the field of study, which is somehow related to the previous question. Despite the fact that results in tests are very similar, even today there are marked gender differences when it comes to choosing the course of study. Engineering courses at the upper secondary level tend to be predominantly male. Young men are overrepresented in math, computer science, engineering, manufacturing, and construction. Women are overrepresented in humanities, art, education, social sciences, and health and welfare. So the question is it nature or nurture? The test shows is not nature, so it's actually nurture. In fact, differences emerge because of socialization into appropriate gendered behavior from infancy onwards. In fact, adults interact with babies differently according to their gender from the early infancy. And now to my favorite part, the benefits of education. Educating girls, research shows, brings benefit both at an individual and at a systemic level. Education brings benefit at the individual level for women and their families. Better educated women tend to be more informed about nutrition and healthcare, have fewer children, marry at a later age, and their children are usually healthier. Education empowers girls and develops skills like self-management, communication, negotiation, and critical thinking. Education also narrows the gender gap in employment and boosts per capita income. Women with primary education earn 14 to 19% more than those with no education. With secondary education, they can expect to make twice those without education. With tertiary education, 3 times as much. Women with secondary and tertiary education report higher standard of living as compared to those with primary education or lower. The improvements are particularly stark in developing countries. In developing and poorer countries, educational girls and women lead to a wide range of benefits. Improved maternal health, reduced infant mortality and fertility rates, increased prevention against HIV and AIDS. Children of mothers with secondary education are twice as likely to survive beyond age 5 as compared to those whose mothers have no education. Each extra year of a mother's schooling reduces the possibility of infant mortality by 5–10%. A child born to a mother who can read is 50% more likely to survive past age 5. In sub-Saharan Africa, 1.8 million children's lives could have been saved in 2008 if their mothers had secondary education. In Indonesia, 68% of children with scholarized mothers are immunized, as compared to 19% of children whose mothers have no schooling. Most of all, education is the key to end child marriage. Child brides are much more likely to drop out. Each additional year of secondary education is associated with lower risk of marrying as a child. Each additional year of secondary education lowers the risk of having a child before age 18 by 6%. If universal secondary education were achieved, child marriage could be virtually eliminated, and early childbearing could be reduced to up by 3/4, since early childbearing goes hand in hand with child marriage. Education is also a tool to reduce the world overpopulation. Universal secondary education could reduce total fertility by 1/3 in developing countries. Education creates prosperity for the entire country. So it's not only a benefit at the individual level, but for the countries as a whole. Educating girls increases workforce productivity and GDP. Secondary and tertiary education are associated with higher labor force participation and especially full-time work. The annual loss in human capital, wealth due to women's lack of secondary education is estimated between 15 and 30 trillion globally every year. Educating girls is an effective way of tackling poverty. So all the micromanagement loans that Amirta Sen have been advocating for, it's exactly for that. Just think that if employment rate between males and females in Japan were equal, the country GDP would increase by 15%. And the same can be said for almost every country around the world. This table from UNICEF sums up the benefits of education for girls. To wrap up, a little bit of focus on the US. According to an analysis undertaken by Gallup and the US Department of Education, there are 130 million adults in the US who have low literacy skill. Nationwide, 79% of US adults are literate, which means that 1 in 5 does not know how to read. About half of American adults have a literacy below 6th grade. This low level of literacy costs the US $22 trillion per year. 34% of adults who lack proficiency in literacy were born outside the US, which means that 2/3 of the people who do not have literacy are actually American citizens since they were born, which in turn means there is something really wrong with our educational system. As we can see here from this figure from the Department of Education, a third of the American population have low literacy skills. This is in every ethnic, though as we can see in this other slide from the Department of Education, the highest percent is among the Hispanic population. So to wrap up, we learned that education is what really changes one life. However, a little of provocation here. In our research on women leadership, so when it comes to become a woman leader, evidence actually show that education is not the number one factor. Of course, without education, you go nowhere. But at parity of education, which is usually at the college level, at parity of education, in reality, what matters the most is having 1, a male sponsor, 2, either no family or a supportive partner. So what I usually tell my girl students when they ask me for advice is marry well, where marry well is not exactly what it used to mean a long time ago. And this is, if you think, is very sad, because we have so many bright, smart, hardworking women, and their chances of success to arrive at the leadership still depend on a male sponsor and the support, although existed, of a partner. I thank you very much for your attention. Please do not hesitate to get in touch should you have any questions or comments, of course.